Coming up in this video, religion medium. This is part of our Types of Mediumship category in our Mediumship Development Training series. So we've got a couple questions. Can a religious person be a medium? Are mediums in the Bible? Have you witnessed religious mediumship?
You can tell I'm excited about this topic because my inner theologian just gets lit up when I get to talk about theology.
And if you have any questions, drop them in the comments.
I read a lot of stuff, and I've been reading a lot about how God changes the brain, how our thoughts about God change the brain, and how our attitudes towards religion are changing in America, and how they've done several surveys on religion in America, and how, as a whole, religion is starting to die down in America, but at the same time, interest in being spiritual is
on the rise.
It's going off the charts. It's wild magic with the dude. Religion is basing your life on somebody else's experience. Spirituality is living your own.
Absolutely.
In my ever so humble opinion. That's a very good, unbiased kind of very good way to put it.
Perspective, yeah.
So if you are just getting to know us, if you're new, I'm Heather.
And I'm David. From ZenRoseGarden.com.
Let's get into it. I'm really excited about this topic. We touch on this topic now and then with like kind of the weird, stupid, sort of ignorant, uneducated things that people say about mediumship and about spiritual gifts. Then we wanted to kind of touch on it in a more formal way today. Allan Kardak describes religious mediums in his book on Types of Mediums, published in 1861. He was a spiritualist theologian.
A few years ago.
So, but kind of educated, right? I'm going to give you a lot of educated writings about mediumship today. He says religious mediums, which is a category of mediums, and he in his book kind of outlined maybe 70 plus different types of mediums, one of which is a message medium or an evidentiary medium. So religious mediums, he says...
That's one of 70.
Religious mediums receive communications of a religious character and treat religious questions with the help from spirits, often with new inspirational material that may expand or even sometimes oppose current religious thinking.
Think about that for a minute. So if you've got anybody who is religious that delivers a message, where are they delivering it from? Okay? Just saying. I'm just going to drop
I don't know, maybe the spirit world. So today we want to talk about the faculty of mediumship when it shows up as religious mediumship, sometimes called prophecy. We are here to set the record straight regarding the ultimate battle
of is mediumship evil or not?
According to fundamentalist kind of us versus them religions, right?
And yes, we are going to get biblical today.
It's going to be fun. So
gonna get biblical.
Now it's time for the good stuff.
Now it's time for the good stuff. Now it's time for the good stuff.
I live with a child.
I'm not grown up. How dare you?
Ritalin.
Tip number 1, prophets of the old.
Let's look at examples of mediumship in the Bible itself.
Yes.
Okay, I want to start there. The prophet Ezekiel, kind of a big name, describes how the spirit world would enter into him, right? In the spirit would enter into him. He would describe the spirit enters into me and cause him to stand on his feet and speak, which is kind of describing a modern day message medium who's like moved by the spirit to get up to speak.
Yeah. Then you've got Daniel, when asked to interpret the king's dream, right? Brought all his mystical homies to set the tone and raise the energy so that he could tap in and interpret the dream correctly.
So Jesus, I think, was one of the most famous...
He's kind of a big deal. I mean, he might have his own billboards and stuff.
He was one of the most famous mediums in the Bible and was always speaking to spirits, right? Because he's technically a prophet, which is a medium. So one of the most famous examples was when he took his disciples up to the mountain and sat, right? He sat with his disciples on top of the mountain, and it is described that he then connected to the spirit world, and both the spirits of Moses and Elias came to Jesus and spoke through him. And Jesus then conveyed the messages from the spirits of Moses and Elias to his apostles. And it sounds like a classic circle to me.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Then after the death AD, right? After the death of Jesus, Paul, on the road to Damascus, had spontaneous mediumship in the famous story where the spirit of Jesus appears and asked Paul, why is he hating on Jesus, right? And talking smack.
It was really common in the Jewish culture for the kings to have seers, which is a clairvoyant medium, on the payroll. So they would very often have and King David was known to have a seer, and when he needed counseling, he would go to his seer, which is a clairvoyant medium.
Right. What would be a seer?
Advice from the spirit world. So we observe with some confusion about this as I look out on the world, confusion about the argument around mediumship when it comes to fundamentalist religions, because many religions believe in mediumship. And wonder how you could possibly not understand how the function of mediumship works within religious contexts.
Right. You're talking to spirit.
But
right?
It's so basic that it seems ridiculous to me that you wouldn't grasp that without the function of mediumship, you wouldn't have your religious beliefs at all.
Right. In fact, if you want to be rather blunt about it, and let's just get blunt, the entire Christian Bible is a channeled book. Channeled by religious message mediums who wrote their inspirations down and passed it down to modern day believers. Right?
I would think that the religious mediums of old, aka the prophets, are kind of having a chuckle about the irony of the situation. To me, it's kind of funny. But I think people get really angry and they get really positional and they don't see that, like, they call it bread and this other culture calls it, pan. That's the Spanish word for bread. And they're arguing about the bread and they're like, no, it's bread. No, it's pan. No, it's bread. No, it's pan. And it's like the same thing.
But it's
so
bread.
You can see that it's bread if you stand outside of the argument and you look at it and you go, are we five?
And then Ginger says, just praying is communication with spirit.
Simple mediumship.
Mic drop.
I really like it when people think for themselves, and that's what we're all about. For me, I've been a theologian. My dad was a theologian. I've, started studying theology when I was a kid. I've read the Bible probably 26 frickin' times. My dad's read it in 6 different languages. So we would talk a lot about the languaging of the Bible and how words can get really transposed and transported and misunderstood.
Thrown all over the place.
Because we're reading it in English, which is 3 times removed from the original language of the Bible. So a lot of these words don't mean what we think they mean in our modern language. So we don't interpret them correctly at all. And then we start arguments on the misinterpretations of the words, like when they talked about Mary Magdalene being a woman who was not quite in line, and the word was retranslated into sinner, into prostitute, when the original word just meant the woman didn't have her shit together. She just was a sinner. She was off her mark. And finally, 1,600 years later, the Catholic Church finally apologized for the mistranslation and said she wasn't really a prostitute. She was just a lost, kind of confused woman.
JK, my bad.
So, you have to kind of... You really have to look at the stuff with your own brain sometimes.
And then Wild Magic with the Dude says, Moses was a shaman. No doubt. No doubt.
Technically, yes.
Look at this snake, you'll be healed.
This is my jam. It's always been my hobby to read holy books of the world and just kind of dissect them.
Break it down.
My dad and I, these were our conversations growing up, just really talking about it in depth, because he was kind of a crazy man about it too.
Tip number 2, saints. Now we're moving into the modern era.
So let's talk about saints, okay? Right. In Christian mystic traditions, we've got a lot of saints hanging around, especially in Catholicism, and you see countless, I'm going to give you 2 really famous examples, but countless examples of mediumship in the Christian saints and in other religions. But when you tend to get the conflict is in the fundamentalist us versus them Christian religions. Not in every Christian religion, but in some. Okay, and Saint Teresa of Avila, who's always been one of my favorites, was a Spanish nun in the 1500s.
She might have spoken Spanish.
Wrote extensive inspirational and prophetic writings. She reported levitation. There's a few reports that she actually levitated during a church service. Who knows? How these rumors get started. But she did experience out-of-body experiences. She was known for ecstatic trance-channeled messages. And she basically exhibited many, many recorded examples of physical mediumship through her life. I've read her works. She kept detailed records of her experiences, which basically read like dyed-in-the-wool examples, classic, of a very great variety of phases of mediumship.
So she was a classic physical, mental, and motor trance medium.
It's right there. You have to analyze these mystics by what they bring into the world.
Yes.
So if what you're bringing into the world is of a positive,
nature,
uplifting, spiritual nature, then it's coming from a good source. If it's filled with hate and division, it's not coming from a good source. I don't care if you're a religious medium or not.
Can we just keep it simple for a moment? You're channeling good shit, it's coming from a good place. You're channeling bad shit, it's coming from a bad place.
My dad, who was a mystic, very much in touch with the spirit world his whole life, would say, let's keep it simple. To understand if it's right or wrong is by their actions, by their fruits, you're going to know them. So
whether that is person, whether that is spirit, whether that is God.
So what are you putting out there? So the other saint, one of my other favorite saints who were mediums is Saint, I think most of the saints are mediums. So Saint Padre Pio, his name is Francesco Forgione, was born in 1887. He died in 1968. So we're coming pretty close to the modern era. He produced physical mediumship phenomena such as the stigmata, as well as extensive mental mediumship from the time he was a little boy.
Little boy.
So go watch our child medium video because he was a child medium. So as a child, he experienced visions of the heavens and those kinds of ecstatic experiences. So he was already prone to being a religious medium as a little boy.
And he ended up passing away in 1968. On a fun little side note, we're
friends of some of his
of the Forgione family, right? People who have had the visions of who was that? That lady of Guadalupe, I think. That would be another example of human beings having a spiritual mediumship experience as a collective.
Let me throw a question at you before I ask you for your opinion. So the question is, just because it is a religious medium, does it mean that it is inspired positively?
Right.
Of course not. This is why you have to think for yourself.
Even if someone claims to be religious or have a religious message, self-check.
So I know we've talked about the prophets of the Bible, and we tend to look at those holy books that were written for different cultures in different times with this Holy Grail mentality, but also understand that we're talking about mediums who are mediums in a certain time period. They had their own human shit too.
Right.
So that's going to come through sometimes. So you have to really analyze what is being said for you personally.
Right. Personal filters. Filter the information coming in. So many religions are accepting of others. And some have an us versus them kind of thing.
So the quality of religious mediumship, like any other type of medium, is determined by the character of the channel or the person through which the message comes, right?
So whether it is ethical, accepting, and compassionate or not.
So maybe if they're saying God says we need to go kill all these people because they're not obeying the laws, maybe you got to think about that a little bit, think about it for yourself.
Instead of just running off and doing the thing because God said so.
So because God said so, because somebody said that God said so. So
exactly.
You have the ability to have that direct channel to truth yourself.
Yep. Now we're going to get a little nerdy.
My dad was a mystic. Like I said, he was a theologian, but he was also a scientist. He worked for NASA. He was a mathematician. He was a chemical engineer, so he very much had his finger on the pulse of let's look at the science too. So neuroscientists who study the effect of how we think about God or religion in the brain see that we think about God and religion in the brain in different spaces of our brain, depending on our attitudes. So they find that religion itself is not damaging to the brain, as many kind of modern writers will tell you.
It is authoritarianism. Okay, that is what is damaging.
Okay, because when you have an us versus them mentality in your religion, you create division, strife, and primal brain conditions in the brain itself that lead to anger, toxic behavior, and low-grade hate among separate religious groups. It literally changes your brain.
towards irrational behavior.
Like we got to kill the people that aren't like us.
Right. And what this is doing inside of the brain is it is triggering those neurochemicals, neurotoxins into parts of your brain that think rationally. So it's basically damaging that part of your brain that can actually see rationally.
So you see it in the animosity of fundamentalist religious groups that have towards mediumship,
Right.
which is ridiculous because all religions use mediumship in some way, whether or not they call it mediumship.
Right.
So I think what's interesting about this is that trend, like I talked about in the beginning, away from religion itself and towards spirituality. So you
Right.
see a lot of people who want that connection.
But they don't want that damaging neurotoxin programming in their heads.
So you see people that want that connection, but they seek it and they're like, oh, I like this piece from this religion. That makes sense for me. That helps me connect to spirit. And somebody from this religion might, oh, take it. It works for us.
Yes.
It works for you.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more sharing of different light switches
Right.
that are the religion. And sometimes people don't even use those. They just connect themselves.
A person themselves who doesn't self-check is literally damaging their own brain because they're going along with the us versus them mentality.
Those are people that are not thinking for themselves.
Right.
You know, so, and you're in the fear of if I don't, then God's going to punish me. But
Right. Or I'm going to get kicked out of this religion and my friends aren't going to like me.
So we want to know, what has your experience been when talking to religious people about this stuff?
Rational, human, and understanding, or completely judgmental, inhuman, and absolutely irrational. What is your examples been?
And like I was
Or
talking
experience.
about with the neuroscience aspect of scans of the brain, when people think about God, when people think about God from a fundamental way, God is an angry God, they're thinking about God from a different space. When people think about the idea of God from that meditative part of their brain, they're accepting of other people's beliefs and how other people want to see God or connect to a God. So it really depends on
How they choose to access the parts of their brain.
your own personal shit gets in the way.
Yeah. And personally, I have had experiences with both types. So I've had religious conversations, and they've been the most amazing conversations of like communication, compassion, understanding, rationality. It makes sense. And then I've had other conversations where it doesn't matter what kind of a conversation we start having, it goes into that oppositional, and I'm like, we're just having a conversation, and I say something wrong, and suddenly it goes into two animals fighting, even though I'm not fighting. So I've had both ends of the spectrum. Marianne says, OMG, they say I worship the devil.
Sometimes when people have that attitude, they're so close to their own fear center. When they're projecting things about the devil and Satan and evil and demons onto you as a person who is a spiritual seeker that is seeking to connect to the spirit world by developing your mediumship and your psychic senses and your meditative practices. I think the people that project that idea are living so close to their own fear that they can't see what's in front of them. I'm going to go off on neuroscience again just a second.
Yes, please.
So neuroscience has found in scans of the brain of people who are praying and meditating that people who pray, there's less positive change on the brain, but only for one reason. And people that meditate for 12 minutes or more a day actually create a change in that compassion center, in that empathy center, in that intuitive center in the brain. The only difference is that when you pray, you tend to only pray for a few minutes. So it's not enough time to create a change in the brain. So, and if you're praying from a fear-based sort of give me, help me, and it's a few minutes, you're praying with a sense of fear. So what they have found, that if you're in prayer,
In contemplative prayer.
in a contemplative prayer where you're having a conversation with the divine, however that looks to you, and they found it does not matter the religious context in which you pray, as long as the prayer itself is contemplative of love and a communion.
It's not whether or not you pray, but how you pray.
If you do that, you have positive change in the brain, where your brain actually grows in a positive manner. So these are things that are I want to give to you today. So let's.
Deb says people think I'm nuts to try and figure out gifts. Okay, I come from an open Christian family, and so some family are curiously cautious, and some swear I'm playing with devil worship.
Well, it's funny because in the Bible itself, it talks about your spiritual gifts and how you should explore your spiritual gifts. And there's one quote that says, "Do not leave your gifts under a rock. Develop your gifts so that they may be seen."
Yes.
That's not an exact quote, but that's what it says. I think it's Proverbs. Yeah. So there's in the Bible itself, it tells you to some are given the gift of prophecy, seers, revelation, interpreting tongues. It talks about the gifts in the Bible itself and that you should not hide them but develop them.
So if you just look at the spiritual gifts that the Bible is talking about that are God-given.
So I find that many of the arguments that uneducated people that are fundamentalist or in fundamental religion put forth these arguments, the counter argument is right there in the text. So,
but if they've damaged that part of their brain, they literally have brain damage.
They can't read.
I'm just saying
that y'all can't read.
The same thing with how you meditate. If you're doing law of attraction stuff and you're operating from fear, you're creating damage to your brain. You're doing the same thing as if you're praying from a fearful place. If you do it from the contemplation, from the fluid, from the connection place, then you're growing your brain and you're doing good.
Are you praying for a positive result or a negative result?
Exactly. So now let's move on to tip number 3, the modern minister.
So I've had a really great, expansive experience, and I'm grateful for that, to witness many different ministers in many different religions. For a while in college when I was a singer, I would do Sunday side gigs and go sing in different churches, of which I was not of the denomination. So I wasn't Catholic, but I had a gig as a Catholic song leader for a while. I sang in a Christian Science church. I sang in other Christian churches for, as a professional singer, as a gig to guide this. So all day Sunday, I'd go to different churches, and that was a really great experience. It was during college. I was like 19, 20, 21. So many times when I've been to a religious service of some kind in different denominations, and attending many just as an observer, a participant, not necessarily as a singer.
Right.
A Jewish temple I've attended where a rabbi was speaking, a Catholic Mass, a New Thought church, seeing an Episcopal minister, a Buddhist teacher who's in an auditorium speaking. There is a moment when something shifts and the speaker steps into that space where we call sitting in the power of mediumship, where they connect to spiritual inspiration. And if you have studied it and you're observing it, you can see it if you're an observant of the shift when the connection itself occurs.
It's actually really inspirational to catch it, to watch it, to witness that change, that shift when they go into prophecy mode, when they go into channeling mode, when they go into spiritual mode. And many ministers can attest to this moment that is just like, it's magic, when spirit takes over. In terms of religious mediums, in mediumship, we would call this connecting to a communicator, where you're connecting to spirit, right? And in a religious context, this communicator might be called God, the Holy Spirit, divine wisdom, source, whatever it is. The names vary when it comes to the religious medium, but the message itself is inspiration. Inspiration is that connection and that delivery of that message.
So for me, when I was little, I could see the aura, so it's kind of been a natural thing for me. So one of my favorite things watching a religious medium speak is physically seeing their aura, which starts here. They're inspired, it's kind of glowing, but when they start to speak, it expands, it gets brighter, it gets more intense, and it expands out like their energy is reaching out to something.
Yep.
And then there's that click, that shift when you can almost tangibly see them connect.
Yep.
and you feel them connect. So John Page Hops.
Hops. It's all about the beer.
I love my old spiritualist writers and my theological writers. I read a lot of their works because I think it's important to see how other people transmit the information and describe it. So John Page Hops was a British Unitarian minister, and he was educated at General Baptist College in England. And he wrote a following little clip about mediums around 1850. And
so a few years ago.
So he was your typical standard Baptist educated minister. He said, quote, and I quote, when we ask how the prophets got what they called the word of the Lord, we find how akin they are to our modern medium. The prophet of old, he says he, but it can be a she. He had visions. He was clairvoyant. He went into trances. He heard voices, or he was moved by an ecstasy that sometimes went perilously near raving.
Like raving mad.
Unquote.
Yeah. And even though my church uses mediums and seers, but they would put me out of the church if they knew what I'm studying. Wow, yeah.
Kind of crazy.
And Denise says, Deb, my situation is very much the same. It's hard to follow what is calling you when you're always being judged negatively. Yeah, and that gets in the way. And for everyday people, okay, spiritual gifts that we were talking about earlier include mediumship. If God is a spirit and you convey God's wisdom, that's mediumship. That's channeling.
From studying about what is God for so many years in my own life as a theologian, I find that, everybody senses and sees what is God in a different way.
And experiences.
Little kids will tend to draw a picture of God as a face and a stick figure. And as people get older, they tend to draw a picture of God as a symbol or an idea or a concept, like a spiraling ball of energy. So our idea of God changes from person to person, from age to age, from belief to belief. So when we're talking about what that is, there is no way to get on the same page about it, because we all have a different experience of God, and to allow others to get to that space is a totally unique journey. And I do find that as you talk about it more, you will find more people that are more open, because the squeaky wheel always gets the grease, right? So you've always got the people that are angry and squeaky about it. I think they're more in the minority, to be honest. It's just that they're
louder. Yeah.
I think more people are quietly pursuing their spirituality and their gifts in the way that seems fit. And the trend, the numerical trend in the world, is moving into that acceptance.
Yes.
So much more than you think.
So go and do you, and connect to your experience of God, whatever that happens to be, religious or not. But please explore from expansion instead of damaging your brain with fear. That's what I'm going to say. Marianne says, I was at a church service. There was a missionary there. He was highly evolved. He prayed over me and put his hand on top of my head. I could feel electricity running through my head into all my body.
A spirit comes where spirit comes. So I was on a plane ride, went back when I was...
Hashtag Heather Storytime.
Heather Storytime. I was on a plane ride. Sitting next to me was a Christian missionary who had just finished his service like a year and a half on an Indian reservation. And he was telling me about his experience, and he was like, I came there to teach them about Jesus, but they taught me almost more than I taught them, because when I emerged into their belief system and really accepted them for where they are, and he said, you got to understand, being on a Christian mission on an Indian reservation, you're really not connected to the church itself so much. You're there kind of living with the people. And he said it was much more of a blending of belief and seeing where we were common. And he said the spiritual experience that I had with them in their culture and what we shared with each other was so beautiful and amazing that I can say that my beliefs are, I'm still Christian, I still believe in Jesus. He says, but my eyes are opened and we connected to God in so many different beautiful ways that I wanted to stay there.
Wow. So I'm just getting emotional hearing that story.
It was a beautiful story, and we talked for 3 or 4 hours on the plane about beliefs and how they can divide us instead of unite us.
And that is a prime example of talking to somebody who exercises that anterior cingulate cortex, the expansive part of the mind that gets to see the bigger picture. Okay, those are beautiful moments. And I've had similar experiences with different people from religions that are very open, very compassionate, very understanding, and very sharing. Okay, so when you connect with somebody of any religion who happens to be a sharing type individual, regardless of their religious construct, it's a beautiful experience. When you connect with somebody who is more in that fear-based us versus them fundamentalist, there's only one way and it's my way and screw you. I'd rather do something else.
In my opinion, I think those of us that are seeking and that are becoming more confident in that seeking and sharing are getting a lot less tolerant of the people that are the haters. We're just like swipe left. I don't have time for that. And
I got other shit to do.
I don't have time to talk you out of your belief, because if you need to be in that fear, then have at it, bro. Yeah. But I'm going to swipe left and hang out with my Zen heads.
When you have somebody in the metaphysical field who approaches with that same fear-based place in their mind.
And you see it.
You see it. Let me know if you've seen it in the comments. Fear-based place, there's only one way to protect yourself. There's only one way to do this. There's only one way to do that. And it's my way. And your way sucks. And I'm scared of it. And I don't want to talk about it. You have to do it my way. They're there. So it doesn't matter in religious context or in everyday life. When you've got somebody who's contemplative, who is open, who is expansive, who shares, that's coming from that front part of the mind, which is more open to expanding. So you want to get woke? There you go.
A lot of stuff to think about, but, all moving you toward a positive, more tolerant, accepting behavior. Because no matter what other people are doing and throwing hate and doing all this, it's also not your job to convince them otherwise.
Exactly.
Because they're in a state of their brain where they're not connected to peace, love, understanding, the real basic direction you got from the big JC, which is like love one another. Pretty simple, Were
you talking about John Lennon? Because that's JL.
JC, that's Imagine.
Oh.
JC, anyway. Love one another. When he was asked, what is the simplest commandment? He said, love one another. Have we cleared up some mysteries, woken you up a little bit, and busted some myths?
It is a revolution. We are fighting back. Revolution. We're fighting back against lost fairies and unicorns running amok.
Causing chaos and wreaking havoc. Swipe left on the haters.
Yes, we do love them both.
But sometimes they drink too much love and light and puke rainbow frosting all over the carpet, which is super hard to get out. So we do want to take a moment and give some love back to one of our Zen heads, Dee, who shared her experience with us on the Google machine recently. She said, I had complete terror of the other side to the point of it crippling me. Now I feel safe and carefree. Thank you so much. Short and sweet, simple. That's what I'd love to hear. Thank you, Dee.
I see the same thing with so many people scared of this thing that they just don't know. And when they start to dip their toe in the water, start learning a little bit more, it's like, okay, that's not so bad. That's not so bad. Again, the openness part of the mind that starts to look at something as, okay, I can learn from this, I can grow from this, I can become a better person by just building skills.
So is this right for you? Let's find out. Are you tired of mediumship advice that is way too complicated?
Come on, for real. Are you tired of our personal favorite, people telling you that the intuitive arts are satanic? Are you ready for psychic and mediumship that will not scare the crap out of you? If so, Zen Academy is the rebel base. Gotta love the rebel base.
So what is it? Zen Ed Academy is where the science of self-growth meets the magic of mysticism. Real information without all the unicorn poop.
This is going to work for you even if you are a complete virgin to this and have never had your metaphysical cherry popped.
I keep saying I think I've had mine pop like 4 or 5 times.
Marianne says Zen Ed Academy fucking rocks.
I love it.
And she also says we are crazy.
Well, yeah.
I'll own that.
Well, yeah.
All the info down below. If you like this video, hit that like button 5 times. Just kidding, once will work.
And if you have any questions, let us know in the comments below. That is where we get ideas for new videos.
And for more mind-hacking pro tips,
be sure to subscribe.
And clickety-click that bell to turn notifications on.
So you're the first to know
when we drop a new video. Time is a valuable and precious resource. And the fact that you guys have chosen to spend that with us,
take 2.
We absolutely honor and appreciate that. But most importantly, that you guys are ready to use your mind in a way for you to get woke. We honor and appreciate that even more, taking your life and your business to an entirely new level. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.
I'll see you in the next video.